Have you ever walked into a place you built from the ground up, only to be treated like you didn't belong, to be looked at as if your presence was a mistake, as if your skin tone and your outfit defined your worth more than your name, your legacy, or your accomplishments? This story is not about revenge, it's about restraint. Not about rage, but the right to stand in your own space and be recognized for who you are. This is the story of Diana Mitchell, a woman who turned grit and vision into an empire only to be told she was unwelcome inside her own kingdom, and how she responded not with fury, but with the kind of leadership the world desperately needs more of. Today, let's start with the setting. Beverly Hills sunlit sidewalks, boutique storefronts, gleaming under blue skies, the kind of place where everything is curated, polished, and expensive. It's the flagship store of Luminous Designs, a luxury jewelry brand known for its brilliant craftsmanship and high-profile clientele. And on this particular morning, a woman stepped through the doors not dressed like a millionaire, not escorted by bodyguards or followed by paparazzi, but wearing a well-loved coat, worn sneakers, and confidence that didn't need to scream to be heard. Her name was Diana Mitchell, the founder and CEO of the brand, and no one in the store recognized her, not even the manager. And that was by design. Diana believed in staying connected to her business, not just from spreadsheets and investor calls, but from the ground floor, walking the floor of her stores unannounced to see how people were treated, how values were lived or lost. And that's something more business leaders should learn from, because culture isn't what's written in the handbook. It's what people do when they think no one's watching. Now, here's the thing. Diana wasn't trying to test anyone. She genuinely enjoyed moments like this, observing without attention, blending in to see what was real. But that day, what she saw was a reminder of how quickly people judge by appearance instead of essence, and how systems meant to uplift can quietly betray their mission when left unchecked. The boutique was quiet, soft jazz playing in the background, velvet-lined display cases glinting with diamonds and gold. And behind one of them stood Patricia Whitman, store manager, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp, posture rigid. Patricia saw Diana enter and instantly dismissed her from across the room. Not with words, but with narrowed eyes and a tight smile. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that says, "I see you, but I wish I didn't." Diana walked slowly past the Aurora collection, one of the brand's most prestigious lines, featuring rare gemstones in one-of-a-kind settings, and that's when Patricia stepped in quickly with a rehearsed tone. "Excuse me, ma'am, you might want to try the pieces in the back, more affordable options." Diana blinked, not in confusion, but recognition. She had seen this pattern before, not just in stores, but in boardrooms, on airplanes, at conferences. The subtle suggestion that someone like her should aim lower, dream smaller, ask for less. Patricia continued, "This area is by appointment only," and Diana replied gently, "Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that policy." Patricia's voice tightened. "It's not a policy exactly, it's just best practice for guests who aren't on our high-spend client list." And this is where I want to pause, because this moment right here is where so many people feel their dignity start to slip, where they start to doubt themselves. Wonder if maybe they are being too sensitive, but they're not. It's real. It's not imagined. It's exhausting, and I've heard it echoed in countless real-life stories, like the black doctor in Florida who was mistaken for a nurse and ignored during a patient consultation, or the tech founder in San Francisco who was told to use the delivery entrance while visiting his own office building. These aren't one-offs, they're patterns, and they wear people down. Diana didn't push back, not yet. She simply nodded and asked, "What can you tell me about this necklace here?" Patricia barely glanced at it. "That one's quite expensive. It's not something we typically show without ID or a credit check." Diana smiled quietly and said, "Well, I happen to know a little bit about tanzanite." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious, really. And where would you learn about stones like this?" Diana tilted her head. "I've been around jewelry for a while. It's something I'm passionate about." But Patricia wasn't listening anymore. She had already decided who Diana was, based on what she wore, how she spoke, and what she looked like. And no amount of knowledge or calm would change that. In her mind, Patricia stepped away quickly when another couple entered the store. An older white man in a designer suit and his wife dripping in labels. Patricia lit up instantly, all warmth. "Welcome," and Diana watched the transformation happen with practiced efficiency. Patricia offered champagne, gave an in-depth tour of the new arrivals, and personally opened the locked display for them. And here's what's so telling about that shift. The rules Patricia just used to exclude Diana magically disappeared for someone else. And that's how bias often hides behind policy until someone more familiar walks through the door and suddenly everything is flexible. Diana quietly stepped aside, giving the couple space but not leaving. Not yet, she wasn't finished. She had already seen what she came to see, and she wasn't going to let it pass unaddressed. Patricia returned 15 minutes later, glancing at Diana, still lingering near the main case, and said sharply, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you're not buying anything. We don't allow loitering." Diana looked her in the eye, calm, unflinching. "I wasn't loitering, I was evaluating." Patricia frowned, evaluating what exactly. Diana reached into her bag and pulled out a slim leather folio, flipping it open slowly and saying, "Evaluating how well this store represents the brand I created." And at that moment, Patricia's face went pale. The words didn't compute. She shook her head. "I'm sorry, what are you saying?" Diana didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat. She simply said, "My name is Diana Mitchell, and I am the CEO and founder of Luminous Designs, and you just asked me to leave my own store." For a long moment, no one moved. The boutique was suddenly silent, as if every sound had been vacuumed out of the space. The soft jazz playing overhead now sounded almost surreal in the background, like music for a scene no one wanted to be caught in. Patricia's expression cracked, her posture stiffened, and her mouth opened as if searching for words that refused to come. And around them, the staff who had overheard fragments of the conversation began to piece together what had just happened. Ashley, a junior associate, dropped the tray she had been carrying. Kevin, the assistant manager, blinked as if trying to catch up, and Marcus, the security guard who had been standing quietly by the front entrance, took a small but intentional step forward, instinctively moving toward Diana like a quiet show of support. And what happened next was not a shouting match. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the explosive movie moment people expect when power is reclaimed, because real authority doesn't need to raise its voice. Real power speaks calmly and lets the silence do the work. Diana slowly closed her folio, tucked it back into her bag, and looked Patricia in the eye. The look was not cruel. It was not angry. It was simply clear and undeniable. The kind of gaze that says, "I built this from nothing. I've sat through meetings where no one said my name correctly. I've been told no more times than I can count, and yet I'm still standing. I've earned the right to be here more than anyone in this room." And Patricia seemed to finally understand that this was no longer about controlling a situation. It was about being held accountable for it. "Ma'am," Patricia stammered, "I am so sorry. I didn't know. I had no idea." Diana nodded slowly and said, "Exactly, that's the problem. You didn't know. And instead of serving every guest equally, you made assumptions. You disrespected me in a store I built with my own hands. And those assumptions are not just offensive, they are dangerous because they send a message, not just to me, but to every employee, every customer, and every passerby, that this space is only for some people. And that's not who we are." And here I want to pause, because this moment echoes across countless real stories, not just in boutiques, but in boardrooms, in banks, in restaurants. We remember Oprah Winfrey being turned away from a Swiss luxury store because the clerk didn't believe she could afford a handbag, or former President Barack Obama describing how he was often mistaken for a valet in his early days. These aren't isolated incidents. They are part of a pattern, a system of coded exclusion, where the assumption of unworthiness is assigned based on skin tone, clothing, accent, or posture. And what Diana did in this moment was break that cycle, not with a lawsuit or a camera, but with poise and precision. She turned to Kevin, the assistant manager, and said, "Kevin, what's our current customer service training protocol?" Kevin swallowed nervously and replied, "We follow the corporate handbook, ma'am. We haven't had a refresher since the last quarter." Diana nodded. "Good, that's about to change." Then she turned to Ashley, the young associate who had been watching with growing unease. "You seem surprised by what happened." Ashley nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I didn't know it was you, but I also didn't think she should treat you like that, even if you weren't." And that right there was the turning point, not just for the story, but for the culture of the store. Diana smiled gently. "Thank you, Ashley. That's the kind of thinking we need." And then she turned to Marcus, who stood respectfully by his post, and said, "I appreciate that you didn't rush to judgment. You observed, you stayed calm. You're doing your job with integrity." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Miss Mitchell." And in that moment, Diana wasn't just correcting a single injustice. She was rebuilding a broken frame of how the store viewed its purpose, its people, and its policies. Patricia, however, was still spiraling. She tried one more time to salvage the moment. "By blaming protocol, I just wanted to protect the store." She said, "We get a lot of walk-ins, and sometimes it's hard to know who's who." And that statement, which she meant as an explanation, was actually the most revealing part of all, because it showed her internal checklist of worthiness had nothing to do with actual behavior and everything to do with perception. She didn't ask for names, she didn't assess conduct. She simply judged by cover. And Diana looked at her and said, "Patricia, you weren't protecting the store, you were protecting your comfort, and that's not the same thing. I've worked too hard to build a brand that prioritizes dignity, inclusivity, and excellence for it to be reduced to elitism and discrimination." And with that, she said the words no one saw coming. Patricia effective immediately. "Your employment with Luminous Designs is terminated. You will be escorted off the premises, and your access to all internal systems is revoked." The room held its breath. Patricia stuttered. "Ma'am, please, I can learn. I can do better." Diana didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "You had the chance to treat every guest with respect and you chose not to. I don't have the luxury of keeping people in leadership who only lead when they're comfortable." And that's the lesson that rippled through the store more than the firing itself. Because leadership isn't proven when things are easy. It's revealed when things are messy, when they challenge our bias and force us to look deeper. And as Patricia collected her belongings, the staff looked on, not with fear, but with awakening. They were watching not just a boss, but a founder hold her values up to the light and demand that everyone who represented her brand do the same. And when she turned back to Kevin and Ashley, she didn't just promote them, she affirmed them. She said, "Kevin, I want you to take over as interim store manager, and Ashley, I'm naming you assistant manager effective today because both of you saw something wrong and you paused instead of piling on. And that matters more than, Kevin looked stunned. Ashley's hands trembled slightly, and in that moment they both understood that accountability doesn't just remove the bad, it elevates the good. And this wasn't about making an example. This was about restoring balance, about returning the store to what it was meant to be, a place of beauty that respected the beauty of every person who walked through its doors. With Patricia gone and the room still holding the echo of that quiet reckoning, Diana didn't leave the boutique right away. Instead, she walked the floor, moving slowly between the displays like an artist, revisiting her canvas, touching pieces, adjusting angles, and gently straightening a necklace that had been slightly misaligned on the velvet stand. It wasn't just habit, it was symbolic, because when something has been tilted out of place, the act of correcting it isn't about ego, it's about restoration. And Diana had spent decades building Luminous Designs, not just as a business, but as a statement, a response to every room she'd ever been underestimated in, to every time she had been called articulate, like it was a surprise, or asked if she was lost while entering her own boardroom, or congratulated for her poise in moments of open disrespect. This brand was born from a vision of elegance that was inclusive, from a fire that came not from rage but from a refusal to be erased. And what just happened? In this store was bigger than a bad employee. It was a microcosm of a reality too many face in stores across the world, where Black women especially are asked to prove their right to belong in luxury spaces over and over again, even when they own the company. What's why Diana took a moment to speak to everyone, not as CEO, but as a leader, as a human being. She stood by the main display case and said, "I want to thank those of you who showed restraint, who asked questions, who didn't jump to conclusions, because that's what service means, and not just selling, but seeing, not just responding, but listening. This store, like every store that bears my name, is meant to be a space where grace is extended, not withheld, where judgment is reserved, and curiosity is encouraged, because we don't know people by their shoes or their bank accounts. We know them by how they show up and how they treat others. And if we ever forget that, then we've lost the soul of the brand. I started, and I will not allow that to happen again." The employees nodded, not because they had to, but because they understood, some for the first time, truly grasping the weight of what they represented. Working here wasn't just about jewelry. It was about values, and that matters more than polished floors or Polished stones, Diana then turned to the customers who were still standing respectfully by, unsure whether to leave or stay, and she addressed them too warmly, not apologetically. I want to thank you for your patience today. I know what you witnessed was uncomfortable and maybe even shocking, but it was necessary, and I believe in transparency because too many companies hide moments like this behind closed doors and sweep the discomfort away. But discomfort is often the beginning of growth, and we welcome that here. The couple who had been fawned over earlier nodded, and the wife stepped forward quietly to say, I think we've all learned something today. Thank you for handling it the way you did. And that comment reflected the broader message. Because when injustice is met with composure and clarity, people remember. They don't just applaud, they reflect, they carry it forward. Diana made a few more adjustments, thanked each employee by name, then finally turned to leave, but not before glancing one last time at the necklace display that had started it all. She smiled softly and stepped out into the California sunlight, the door chiming behind her. And that's where the story ends. Not with revenge, not with viral footage or shouted speeches, but with resolution and the example of a woman who could have unleashed her full authority and anger, but instead chose to lead with principle. And here's the takeaway for all of us. The world is still full of places that judge too quickly, that label people by race or outfit or accent, that assume power must come in a certain package. But those assumptions can only persist if we allow them to. And every time someone like Diana stands firm in the face of disrespect, without raising their voice but without backing down, they crack the surface of that old foundation. And they let. Light in leadership is not proven in corner offices or media accolades. It's proven in moments when you have the chance to crush someone, and instead you choose to correct them, when you could humiliate, but instead you educate, when you walk into a room that doesn't know your name, and instead of announcing it, you let your integrity reveal it for you. And this story isn't just Diana's. It belongs to every person who's ever been mistaken for less than what they are, and chose not to lash out but to rise higher. And by doing so, made it just a little easier for the next person to be fully seen, not just as a customer or a title, but as a human being, worthy of respect from the moment they walk through the door. Because in the end, that's what justice really looks like. Not just policy change or firings, but the quiet correction of something broken and the firm refusal to let it stay that way.